Over the last few days, I did almost everything that Horizon Forbidden West had to offer, and here's why I think you should do the same, especially that almost part. Now, full disclosure, PlayStation sent me an early copy of this game a few days ago, and 3-ish days and 42 hours worth of game later, I got the Platinum Trophy. I had done everything that was considered important enough to be a trophy, as well as another dozen or so hours worth of side content that I just wanted to do because Horizon is so damn fun. It's a more than worthy successor to the first game that improves on Zero Dawn's premise in just about every single way. The game, although it has some visual hiccups here and there, is still drop-dead gorgeous, to the point that I stopped in the middle of playing more times than I could count to marvel in the photo mode, which I never do. And although some of the more cookie-cutter open-world stuff can still feel obligatory, and though I have a feeling that certain facets of Forbidden West will rub some folks the wrong way, I think this game's got an outside shot at contending for 2022's Game of the Year. As another disclosure, despite me doing nearly everything, this review is as spoiler-free as they come. I'm not showing any main story scenes from outside of the first couple hours of the game, and any gameplay that I'm showing, I've selected with great care to keep it out of context so that your experience is fresh. Hopefully that's worth subscribing for, but if not, that's cool too. First things first here, Forbidden West is about as sequel-y as any sequel has ever been. Even though it's been 5 long years since Zero Dawn launched, this game picks up 6 months after that game's ending, as our heroine Aloy tries to stop the looming extinction of all life on Earth at the hand of out-of-control artificial intelligence. Between all of the first game's crucial lore and all the names and faces you probably forgot existed, if you're new or it's been a while, you're gonna be lost at first, and that's maybe the biggest shortcoming on this sequel's part. I did almost everything in that game too, 4.5 years ago, and while I remembered the broad strokes of the story, it took some prodding for me to start recognizing a bunch of Zero Dawn's kinda bland secondary characters and their motivations, or just remembering what the hell an Oseram is. Essentially, the first area of Forbidden West serves as a sort of epilogue to the first game's story, discussing how Aloy ran off after saving Earth last time without even telling any of her friends what was going on. It's a slow wake-up process, almost this game's way of sort of waking you up from a long cryo-sleep. That said, it's also kind of a window into a better version of that first game. Where Zero Dawn showed promise but struggled in execution, namely with those bland secondary characters, Forbidden West excels. One of the major themes of this game is Aloy coming to terms with the fact that she doesn't have to do it all alone, that she's no longer the loner or the outcast she was at the start of the first game, and that unlike her spiritual ancestor Elizabeth Sobek, she's got a trustworthy crew around her. Whether it's old friends or new allies, each character and faction in Forbidden West feels more complex as we learn their stories, or in the case of the factions, their traditions. My favorite of these is a tribe of hunter-gatherers that each carry around a pouch of plant seeds their entire life, so that with their death, they can create new life, or a warrior clan that interprets the exhibits of the museum they call their Holy Land, taking what we would consider to be everyday life and turning it into its own mythos. Each area in the Forbidden West feels more truly lived in, even despite the constant death and despair all around that comes with a robot-animal apocalypse scenario, and thanks to the truly breathtaking variety of terrain and civilization, the team at Guerrilla built one of the most fascinating and engrossing sci-fi universes out there. I'm painting in very broad strokes here, so this is gonna sound like a bunch of vague praise, I know, but I think Forbidden West's story itself vastly eclipses the first game on a technical level, thanks in part to this extra level of care that went into further building the world surrounding Aloy. Even though the first game's mystery was mostly resolved, this game doesn't struggle whatsoever to plant new seeds using those same ancient characters to further show the greed of the humans of our generations that caused the apocalypse that led to Aloy's world 1,000 years later. I think the first game's payoff was so one of a kind that it actually defined Zero Dawn in retrospect, that we maybe hold that game a bit higher than we otherwise would solely because those last few hours were so powerful. I think this game could have struggled to find footing in Zero Dawn's shadow, but instead it leans so much into being a sequel, not just taking Aloy into a random new area, but taking the risk of paying off stuff from a half-decade ago that most of us have forgotten. It pays off more than I could have imagined, although that said, like with any sci-fi story, there are some threads here that I don't think will sit well with some players. It's nothing shark jumpy, but, well, you'll see. It speaks volumes about the first Horizon game that although I hazily remember the general points of the story, and although I totally remember what I consider to be one of the best plot dumps in any video game period, my clearest memory is simply not caring about any of the living characters except Aloy herself. For this game to have turned some of those allies like Erend or Varl into Aloy's family, not just in name, but as this actual group of humans with countless strings of flavor dialogue, people actually having conversation, which is so hard to get right in games, and which Zero Dawn never even came close to getting, it's remarkable, and it's also thanks in no small part to what'll probably be this game's least appreciated performance leap, the vastly improved motion capture and lip syncing. Like, everybody's gonna gush over the visuals, and rightfully so, because even without ray tracing, Horizon might be the PS5's newest performance benchmark, but it feels like close to 80% of this game's quests, whether they're main story or one of the dozen tiers of side quests, have actual motion capture work, actual scanned lip movements, or at least lip flaps that look so good that you can't tell the difference unless you're actively seeking it out. I kept expecting this level of detail to stop eventually, that we'd hit a point where the team said, okay, that's far enough, and retreated back into the basic talking heads, or where we'd start hearing the same voice actors repeating to cut some pretty understandable corners. But no, nearly every chunk of this game had the same effective level of care put into it as the core journey, and so I kept finding myself seeking out all of these side quests to see another slice of life in the different warring tribes. It didn't feel like content just for content's sake. Now, it's not without its hiccups. Guerrilla still needs to figure out the eye tracking stuff because, I promise you, nobody ever looks where they're supposed to. It still does that same thing as the first game where Aloy is constantly looking directly up at a character that's actually to her left or whatever. With how incredible the rest of the character modeling is, this alone kind of drives it into the uncanny valley sometimes. Alongside some other performance hiccups like textures not appearing on time and some memory leaks causing slowdowns and crashes, most but not all of which were addressed somewhat by the Day 1 patch, Horizon's still got the expected open world game jank. But you can still Bethesda your way up a mountain if you want, so I would say it evens out. And speaking of climbing, the greatest overall improvement in Forbidden West is, thank God, the gameplay. Not that Zero Dawn was bad or anything, but a lot of its open world fare was kinda standard. There were a good number of these ancient cauldrons to enter that all kinda looked the same, there were a bunch of Ubisoft map towers, which were of course really cool since they were moving giraffe things, but even when they tried making them feel different, they were still kind of samey. There were camps to raid and loot to grab, loot that didn't matter all that much since most of it was just kinda numbers going up and you don't really notice a real effective difference in practice. Forbidden West, well, actually it still has all that stuff. Even the loot, the weapons, and the armor with different tiers of rarity, and all these upgrades that just don't matter much because halfway through the game you're already overpowered. But with all that said, this game has a weapon that's just Windjammers. Game of the Year. Just give it all the awards right now. So you might be wondering how I can say it's so improved if a lot of the core is the same thing. I'll chalk it up to a few things. One, this game feels so much better to play than I remember Zero Dawn feeling. That's not a knock on Zero Dawn at all, and I made sure not to go back to it for this review since there are millions of folks that are probably going to consider coming into this one first, and millions more that are in the same boat as me where they're simply not going to replay a 20+ hour game to prepare for a 20+ hour sequel. So even with this in mind, for a game to eclipse my fond, almost nostalgic memories of its predecessor says so much. Yes, the core of Forbidden West is the same as before. It's an open-world, third-person action game that puts a heavy emphasis on scanning your enemies and your terrain. All of the machines in this game have their own weak points that you can highlight and focus on, different elemental weaknesses, and if you're careful to shoot off specific parts of their armor, they might get weaker or you might have an important piece of loot to pick up to use later in crafting better gear. For the first few hours, again in that first Zero Dawn 2.0 kinda area, it's gonna feel like more of the same, because at first, it clearly is, just with an added 60 FPS mode for those of you who, like me, played the first game way before the PS5 existed. Also, total aside for a second, this game looks good in 4K, but performance mode wins easily. That marginal drop in visual fidelity going from 4K to 1800p, you're not gonna notice it, and if you say you are, you're probably lying. And it's more than worth it for playing the game at a frame rate that doesn't feel like you're underwater. If you're on PS4, you're out of luck. Anyway, there's an extra it factor to this gameplay loop now, thanks to the vastly improved melee combat, as well as several upgradable skill trees that let you start tinkering your playstyle with new abilities for different types of weapons, and even a handful of ultimate abilities that you can pull out in a pinch. If you're going for 100%, there are a lot of these skills that you just probably won't end up using, but you'll have more than enough skill points to get all the ones you want, even if you just did the main story. I usually stuck to the ultimate that gave me constantly regenerating health for a short period of time, since I played Forbidden West far faster and looser than I did the first game to align more with how much more of a badass Aloy is this time around. Oh wow, an Apex Thunder job? Pfft, I've put like 1,500 hours into Apex, you're nothing to me now, kid.
My shield, my life. My shield, my life.
Number 2 on our list of improvements, and speaking of shields actually, the obligatory open-world glider that's new to Forbidden West is actually a repurposed shield taken from a defeated enemy early on in the game. The freedom this glider provides morphs Horizon from what it used to be, a basic open-world game, into more of an open-air game in the vein of a Breath of the Wild, which is just great considering how many similarities everybody drew between the two games back in 2017. Thanks to the immensely improved climbing mechanics, and again a little bit of Bethesdaing if you want to reach areas you're not supposed to, what was originally a game full of very bog-standard third-person action game climbing sequences now just lets you go anywhere. And the word anywhere means a hell of a lot more in a world this oppressively big. I kept underestimating just how much of the world I'd explored because the map doesn't do justice to its verticality and sense of scale. There's again just another it factor that I haven't felt since Breath of the Wild 5 years ago, where I look out in the distance and do that dumb camera pan that we all do to emulate E3 trailers, and I say to myself, totally unironically, oh yeah, I can go to all this. Replacing or accompanying many of the first game's obligatory yellow painted handholds is a new system based on the terrain analysis feature in Death Stranding, which was made using Horizon's engine. Thanks to this system, you can ping your surroundings and see proper grooves and handholds in the rock faces or walls, and Aloy just climbs up those grooves in a free-form fashion. There's no mashing the X button to climb except for when you have to make actual jumps. There's no stamina meter stopping you. There's no railroading you to a specific pathway. Thanks to the glider, you can just cheese past entire platforming sections with good spacing and feel like your own store-brand diet speedrunner. Following how uniquely freeform Horizon's combat already was, it's a perfect fit for the rest of the game to be a sandbox in the truest sense as well, with multiple options for traversal at any time, with the ability to just glide down a whole-ass mountain and watch as Aloy passes through deep clouds on the way down, to, for so many of these little moments, feel 100% engrossed in this world, to use the new obligatory open-world grapple hook and leap off it right as you land to build more momentum and zoom further into the air, to jump down on some robot dinosaurs and get a diving sneak attack. It's all just stellar. And beyond just the vertical climbing, there's a whole element of underwater exploration that might actually feature the strongest water level design ever. There are so many underwater caves to explore, cauldrons, and even main story, almost dungeons that are exclusively underwater at points, and even looking past the intuitive, so impressive you don't even think about them swimming controls, and the water-based puzzles that give me even more Zelda vibes in the best way, there's a level of spectacle to these massive underwater areas that in a lesser game might feel boring to explore because they're too big and you do swim kinda slowly. Here though, thanks to what might be the PS5's best visual design yet, my jaw was agape while exploring some of these areas. That's not an exaggeration, that's not hyperbole. I was my own virtual archaeologist, just truly marveling at every inch of these wide open areas and at how well they were designed. Yet again, a lesser game would have struggled to keep you moving in the right direction in these dark underwater areas, but Forbidden West guides you so well that even underwater when you might not be able to see too far ahead of you, you won't even realize you're being guided implicitly unless it's coming directly from Aloy talking to herself. I'm so excited to see how this formula begins to develop in future games, because there still are a fair share of moments that are often just follow the marker on your HUD and ping your surroundings until the right thing starts glowing, and a game like Ghost of Tsushima with its environmental cues and minimalist HUD have sort of broken mini-map following open-world games for me. But the fact that Horizon kept my interest for way too many hours a day these last few days deserves so much praise. And that's not just in a this is my job kind of way either. PlayStation didn't send me Forbidden West until after reviews were already out, so from a YouTube sense, I've already lost unless you guys share the hell out of this video. That's not a request, by the way, but it's very appreciated if you do. I'm just stating a fact here. This video isn't gonna have a shot at the top of the recommended feeds against IGN or anything, even if I could make their crappy videos in my sleep. I could have taken my time more, and I felt no need whatsoever to rush once I knew this video wasn't going to be ready by release day. Me playing this game so much and having this video ready as early as it is because I kept wanting to play more, because there's so damn much world to explore, and I couldn't get enough of how drop-dead stunning everything looks, and because I was rewarded with open-world side content that for once didn't feel half-assed in an open-world game, so I put aside other work to keep going with this one. And that brings me to number 3. Most of the returning open-world things don't just feel like more of the same, they've been repackaged and innovated upon. The cauldrons often feel like full-fledged mini-dungeons with a decent bit more visual variety and spectacle, much better overall design. The tall necks are almost parodies of the original games, with often completely different creative criteria to make your way to the top. I mentioned a comparison to Zelda dungeons before, and this game is probably the closest that any non-Zelda game has come to giving me that trademark feeling of Zelda satisfaction from solving puzzles or traversing through areas. Hell, it even does it better than most of the Zelda clones I've played. Now that I've done all the praisey parts, here comes the bad stuff, and there is some. Despite how wildly sandboxy the game's combat is and how many different armor sets and abilities you can use to fine-tune your playstyle, the game still gives you zero reason to care at a certain point unless you're choosing to play on the hardest difficulty. Zero Dawn ran into this too, but it's more of a knock now because in the last half-decade, I would have hoped something better would have manifested instead of more of the same there. So much work clearly goes into the different armors visually, the different color swaps that you can give each of them, and yet because even lower level enemies still deal a good chunk of damage when you're at max level, there's not a reason after like level 20 or so to spend time looking at this menu for multiple minutes on end trying to figure out which one keys into your playstyle the best. I'll be honest with you, I just picked the one with the biggest numbers and stuck with it until I found another one with the biggest numbers. The secondary effects don't feel super significant, especially since that health regen ultimate that I had is so easy to refill and I had so many spare health items at any and all times, I never really felt intimidated by even the strongest of enemies. Moreover, with this game's attachable coils to enhance your different weapons and weaves to attach to your armors, there's even more to do there for those that do really want it. But again, it just doesn't matter until the inevitable New Game Plus and harder difficulty update that's totally coming in like 2 or 3 months. I'm looking forward to those things because I already want to play this game again and use different styles and see what I can min-max to have the best, most awesome setup, and because I want to see all of this work feel like more than obligatory RPG lip service. Hopefully when that time does come, and trust me, it's a PlayStation game, there will be a New Game Plus patch later on, they'll also include some major quality of life tweaks, like, I don't know, the ability to save custom loadouts for your armor sets or your weapon wheel, or some sort of replacement for the awful, genuinely bad setup for consumables and placeable items. I'm kind of baffled that there's not even a favorite button to make sure you can keep track of all your weapons in a menu system where everything looks the same. Back to that consumable button for just a second though, every item in this game besides your quick health restore is mapped to down on the D-pad, so you have to scroll through, no joke, 15 or 20 different items to find the one you're looking for. This includes your mount if you have one, it includes potions that, I swear to god, I never bought, I never owned, I never crafted, so despite having zero inventory, they would still show up here. There's no excuse for it, and this guaranteed that I rarely placed traps because they weren't worth the hassle versus just going in guns blazing. While doing many of this game's challenges like the combat arenas or the melee pits, there's no quick restart button if you mess up and want to reset, so you have to force a failure or do a quick reload to your autosave. Now thankfully the game keeps a hot autosave ready just before every major encounter, or really anything that you do, but I wouldn't really want to rely on that if I were on the PS4 version where loading takes more than a second. I don't know, a quick restart button option, I've done it in games before. In amateur games I coded back in high school, it literally takes 5 seconds. It would take less time than loading the game on PS4, I promise you. These are all smaller things, but they all add up to remind you that this is the sequel to a game that was already kind of dated in major spots back in 2017, and while the style and substance were both vastly improved in Forbidden West, there are some times where the user experience feels almost as ancient as the destroyed buildings featured in the game. Especially in a world that's moved past a lot of the weird, every game needs this stuff, having a total of like 5 pseudo-karmic choices for you to make to pretend that you're shaping Aloy's personality, it's just a weird thing to bring back from the first game. It's admittedly pretty funny that the first couple times you see this thing are just when Aloy is awkwardly rejecting dudes that are trying to hit on her, but with how goal-driven she is and how often her character just powers through these petty political obstacles for the good of all life on Earth, I don't know, it's just kind of hollow to have these here. Doubly so in a game that, and I hate to say this, sometimes just does not know when to shut up. Like I said, I think Forbidden West's story itself surpasses the first game overall, and I love the characters here infinitely more than I could have imagined after Zero Dawn's planks of wood, but there are too many strings of exposition where Aloy's just asking questions and having lore tossed at her for another 20 minutes in main story missions that already average like an hour in length. By the end of the game, I was so engrossed in the main story, but I had to take long, hours-long breaks from doing the story missions just to go kill things, sometimes ignoring dialogue options or optional interactions with Aloy's friends just because I was getting too much of them all at once whenever I did the story. And I adore this game's deep world building. I regret that I couldn't bring myself to talk to the whole gang in between every single mission, but with how much is packed into the missions themselves, it really did feel like overkill unless I went out of my way to do one story mission and then a whole bunch of side content, but halfway through that side content come talk to my buddies because doing that before or after the missions just ended up being too much. It is too much of a good thing, and I really hope that whatever Guerrilla's got planned next can strike the perfect balance, because I know for a fact whatever internal play data they have would show that this stuff is probably losing people. And this is the almost part that I said at the start of the review, when I told you that I did almost everything, and that I heavily recommend you pick this game up and also do almost everything. When I'm done with this video, by the time that you're watching it, it's a safe bet that I'm playing more Horizon to get myself to 100% in Forbidden West. Hell, I might even be loading up my old Zero Dawn save to finish clearing that platinum trophy and doing the DLC. I want more Horizon, even despite the mostly admittedly nitpicks and user experience shortcomings it may have. Even after doing nearly everything in this game in the span of a couple days, I want more of it. Even though I know that because I'm level 50, the rewards are now kind of worthless, I still want to help out the different tribes and finish the last few side quests because they're full of interesting people. Even though I'd estimate that probably 60% of the way to 100% completion, that side content really starts becoming obligatory again, just like the first game's problem. The core loop here is fun enough that I'll keep chipping at it, but I don't recommend doing it as obsessively as the important stuff in Horizon often compels you to. Even then, your desired ratio of story to side content might mean that you need even more or a bit less of the side stuff as a break between all of the exposition the story sometimes just heaves at you. It's a heavy game, and at the very least I respect that all the extra content works to give every player exactly as much distraction as they want or need. The line between important and not so important content in this series is blurrier than ever, and now it's a zigzag too, with parts crossing over back and forth, so if you're not careful, you'll burn out and do yourself the disservice of not seeing this story through to the end. Forbidden West is sort of like a protein powder. It usually tastes pretty good and you really want it, but it's not always mixed as well as it should be, and you get some dry chunks in there that you've just kinda gotta force down. At least, I think. I play video games, I don't even know what protein powder is. Forbidden West's Platinum Trophy is actually really well designed in this regard, in that it sneakily encourages you to try everything once, to do the important stuff in full, and then to dip out after that first 40 to 50 hours if you don't want any more than that. I respect Forbidden West for both giving that content for those that want every drop, for those checklist gamers, or the ones that want an hour of content for every dollar for some reason, no matter how bland it eventually feels, while also admitting, yeah, you're good, don't worry about it, past a certain point, and letting you skip most of the rebel outposts or the weird board game that's in this game for some reason, or whatever it might be. For how incredible a job that Guerrilla did at building this behemoth of a world and never once making the world itself or any of the people living in it feel robotic or subpar, they did just as good a job at respecting your time and guiding you to at least see most of the content. I don't think you should 100% this game, or at least if you do, you should probably do it like me and really just take your time at it after you get the platinum, because it will be a long wait till the next game anyway, I'm sure. But I do think that players should seek out that platinum trophy, that they should try most of the content once. Whether you play Forbidden West for 30 hours though, or over 100, I think you're really gonna get your money's worth. Well, unless you buy that PS5 only copy, because then you're wasting $10. The PS4 to PS5 upgrade is free. Just buy that. Thank you so much for watching, and make sure to let me know what you think of Horizon Forbidden West if you've picked it up already, or let me know if this video convinced you to pick it up at all. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe so that I can throw more videos at you, or don't, I'm not your dad, and if you won't subscribe, I wouldn't want to be anyway. You're a horrible disappointment of a child to me. As always, until the next time I see ya, stay golden.